Well, good evening, this is Hound Dog Steve coming to you on the 5th of September, which is a Wednesday evening. And I haven't made a video for quite a while because I've been pretty busy with election stuff and meetings and so on and so forth. But one thing I've been really concerned about, because I've been seeing more and more of this kind of stuff, is censorship and the shutting down of free speech, or quality filter as we're now calling it. And anyway, here is freedom of speech or else. And this is the Ford government, Doug Ford in Ontario, Conservative government, and it's kind of interesting because freedom of speech is so incredibly important. Okay, freedom of speech is not just a right. Freedom of speech is how we negotiate all our other rights and freedoms. And if we do away with free speech, then how can we possibly negotiate those other freedoms correctly? It is so important for everybody. It doesn't matter what political stripe you are, and it doesn't matter that this is a conservative piece I'm going to be reading to you. This applies to absolutely everybody. And what's stunning about it is here you have a conservative government speaking up for free speech, and you'll see as we go through this article that you have professors who are supposed to be liberal basically calling it down as pandering to a narrow base of the conservatives. Like freedom of speech is not an issue at all, and that freedom of speech is not a central tenet in universities, colleges, anywhere where free discussion of ideas and free flow of ideas has to take place. You have to have freedom of speech, and you have to have the freedom to potentially offend somebody, because the way we learn, the way we grow, is by speaking, making mistakes, being corrected, and moving forward. Okay, so I want to read you this whole article because it is very interesting, as I say. Okay, Ontario colleges and universities must come up with free speech policies or face funding cuts, the Progressive Conservative government said Thursday, delivering on a promise Premier Doug Ford made during the spring election. The schools will have until January the 1st, 2019 to develop, implement and comply with the policies, which experts said were aimed at pleasing a segment of Tory base that was outraged when some speakers and professors came under fire for their conservative views. This would no doubt be Professor Jordan Peterson and Lindsay Shepard and the whole Wilfrid Laurier shameful affair, actually. So I'll link below a video about Lindsay Shepard and the Wilfrid Laurier affair if you're interested. The Tory government said the Higher Education Quality Council of Ontario would monitor compliance starting in September 2019, and schools that don't comply could face funding cuts. Students who contravene the policies will be subject to existing campus discipline measures. That would be because a lot of speakers have been shut down by radical left-wing students who really just don't like the opinions or point of view of that speaker and consider it their right to shut down free speech on campus. Disregarding, of course, that if they feel that that speaker is offensive to them, then it necessarily follows that any speaker that they might bring in would be offensive to the people that they've just shut down, and they're facing the risk of being shut down themselves. You see how this can ping-pong backwards and forwards, and why there are certain issues in this world and in this life we should never question or try and shift, and freedom of speech is one of them. Freedom of speech is paramount. Colleges and universities should be places where students exchange different ideas and opinions in open and respectful debate, Ford said in a statement. Our government made a commitment to the people of Ontario to protect free speech on campuses. Emmett McFarlane, a political science professor at the University of Waterloo, said free speech on campus has become a far-right issue by virtue that most of the controversies have involved people with conservative views. The politics behind this and the motivations of the Premier are quite clear, he said. This plays well with a certain segment of his base. So, here is this narrow point of view suggesting that freedom of speech is just pandering to this narrow base of conservatives, probably I'm sure he thinks are far-right conservatives. Well, I am neither a far-right conservative nor a far-left liberal. I am a centrist by any stripe, and I regard free speech with the highest of esteem. So Emmett, please take that to the bank. So what other evidence do we have? CEO admits Twitter is biased. Here we go, Jack Dorsey, who is coming up to answer questions at Senate hearings in the USA in Washington very shortly. But left-leaning view doesn't influence content. Well, of course it does. And of course this is a thing that the far left people have been accusing anyone who is right of Lynn Redgrave of being, unconscious bias, conservative bias, right-wing bias, blah blah blah, as if that is a whole motivator. Well, if that's a whole motivator for us, surely you're saying that if Twitter is biased to the left, then of course it's going to influence everything that the company does, every decision the company makes. So all I'm saying is, be really careful when you are screaming for someone's freedom of speech to be shut down, because you could very well be shutting down your own freedom of speech. And I've got some other slides here that I'm going to show you which actually prove out what I am saying. So here, let's go take a look at those. Okay, so this is from Reddit, and this is FireEye, and the FireEye is an algorithm that is what they call loosely a quality filter or censorship. Anyway, it is following things that are posted on Reddit and offers some insights and warnings. Anyways, last week FireEye made an announcement regarding the discovery of a suspected influence operation originating in Iran and linked to a number of suspicious domains. When we learned about this, we began investigating instances of these suspicious domains on Reddit. We also conferred with third parties to learn more about the operation, potential, technical markers and other relevant information. While this investigation is still ongoing, we would like to share our current findings. Okay, to date we've uncovered 143 accounts to be connected. The vast majority, 126, were created between 2015 and 2018. Okay, but this is the interesting bit, okay, right here, where it says, unlike our last post on foreign interference, the behaviours of this group were different. While the overall influence of these accounts was still low, some of them were able to gain more traction. They typically did this by posting real, reputable news articles that happened to align with Iran's preferred political narrative. For example, reports publicising civilian deaths in Yemen. These articles would often be posted to far-left or far-right political communities whose critical views of the US involvement in the Middle East formed an environment that was receptive to the articles. But you see, here we are, reputable news articles. They typically did this by posting, so they're saying that the truth, if the truth is used to support something that they do not support, which is Iran's policies, so actual real reputable news has now become dangerous because it could be used to align with a particular narrative that doesn't agree with yours. So what are we going to do? We're going to ban the truth completely? We're going to ban independent reporting and news stories, even from reputable news agencies, because they might happen to support someone else's narrative that you don't happen to agree with? Have we taken leave of our senses? Have we gone absolutely insane when we don't know the difference between truth and bias and prejudice? We can't make those distinctions anymore, and we're frightened to use the truth because it may align with the policy that could be held against me. You see how dangerous this is when you start playing around with this kind of stuff. Here you go, Google's left-wing bias has alienated its own workers. The complaining Conservative employee in the story is discussing gender bias, but his points are sound in a larger sense. It is true that Google, like other leftist new media giants, is indefatigably opposed to viewpoints that dissent from the hard left line, and Google has begun manipulating its search results to conceal criticism of Islam and jihad and material that Muslims don't want seen. Google's left-wing bias has alienated its own workers. Senior engineer claims colleagues with right-wing views are forced to keep them in the closet. And, I might add that just because you have a different view, or it might seem right of where your position is, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's far right. Just as when you're talking to somebody who's on the left, like a liberal or a Democrat, it's not fair to assume that they are on the far left. Okay, but this is from Zero Hedge. This week showed internet censorship is as much a threat to the left as to the right. The banning of right-wing controversialist Alex Jones from multiple social media platforms last week was a cause of celebration for many liberals, but should those on the left really be so complacent about creeping censorship? So far, the evidence suggests that there is indeed plenty for the left to worry about when it comes to corporations like Facebook, Twitter, and their alliances with government censors. 1. Facebook censorship of Venezuelan news. In May, Facebook partnered with the Atlantic Council in an effort to weed out inauthentic content on the platform. This organization is funded by various NATO governments, including Henry Kissinger. But what happens if you are living under an oppressive government and you start stating different views? Is that going to be called inauthentic content? Facebook complying with Israeli deletion orders. Google and Facebook censorship of left socialist websites. The World Socialist website reported last year that changes to Google's algorithms had seriously negatively impacted left-wing socialist and anti-war websites. An analysis by WSWS found that 13 such websites had seen their traffic plunge by a whopping 55% in the 6 months since Google had changed its algorithms. And you see, this is what happens. The algorithm is no judge. There's no humanity in an algorithm. It does not care. You put search words in there that it has to look for, keywords, and it will look for those keywords. It doesn't matter whether they are right-wing or left-wing sites. If those keywords are present, and because those keywords are common to all word usage among humans, there is every chance of that. So we're all facing censorship. Just remember that. We're all facing censorship. And when we beg the government to censor our speech, we are taking a very dangerous step towards 1984. And we will soon be entering the world of wrong speak. Okay, so now you've seen this bizarre situation where, even as that one article was talking about, that people who are placing true and verified articles from media are biased just because it supports their own point of view. So, in other words, even the truth is not good enough if it's used to support the wrong point of view. And I'm wondering if you're seeing what I am, just how dangerous a path this is to travel. And I'm really hoping that we can all see some common ground in this and respect the freedom of speech of everybody. Now, of course, one of the things that comes up when you talk about freedom of speech, one of the counter arguments you will immediately get is, well, not if it's hate speech. Okay, well, I agree, not if it's hate speech. Well, let's define then what is a dividing line between freedom of speech and hate speech. For me, freedom of speech is when you are simply critical of an issue or a person or an idea. Where it crosses over, now that may be offensive. I mean, I'm not saying that it's going to be inoffensive, but it really is it boils down to a difference in a point of view. However, when it crosses over into hate speech, It's when you say something like, hey, let's get a gang together and go and beat up this guy because he has a point of view that we don't agree with. That is hate speech. When you are instigating people to move towards violence, you are creating a hateful situation. And that, to me, is a dividing line. And anything that is not inciting violence, as offensive as it might be, is freedom. It comes under freedom of speech. And we have to all support that. It's incredibly important that we all support that. And I hope some of the slides that I've shown will, give you a reason to speak out about freedom of speech. And it doesn't matter what your political stripe is. When you meet people who are trying to shut down freedom of speech, try and explain to them, as I am trying to explain here, why it's so important that we stand by, stand under, back up, support, and in any way, shape or form keep freedom of speech a core tenet in our society, because we are dead without it. And of course, once you start lying, which is the opposite of free speech, when you pretend things aren't what they are, you have this very real danger of pathologizing your mind. And when you start pathologizing your mind, after a while, you can't decide what is right or wrong, and what should be free speech or what shouldn't be free speech. So I guess the cautionary tale here, or the cautionary warning, is be careful what you wish for. Be very careful what you wish for. So I hope this finds you well. I don't know whether I'm going to be making another video, but I will try and get some more done. There's lots going on in the world. Goodness gracious, there is lots going on in the world. And so I will come back as soon as I can. Please, you take it easy, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you real soon. See you now. Bye.